So maybe I can address the question of winning the lotteries as a funder. So I think you've heard a lot from many of the resources today, and what I'm just going to try to do is recap that as part of the overall data science strategy that our office and NIH coordinates across the board. For those of you who don't know, we're a very complex organization with many different institutes within the National Institutes of Health, and where we are situated is in the Office of the Director as the Office of Data Science Strategy that is charged with serving as a leader in coordinating and implementing the strategic plan for data science across NIH. I won't go into the details of the strategic plan itself, although all I'll say is there's a QR code for you to read it, and then we are in the second stage in the iteration of the strategic plan that's been updated as of earlier this year. But the most important thing is throughout the strategic plan, open infrastructure development cuts across all of the different initiatives that are kind of the blood running under the hood over here. So touching on some of these, I just can't quite do justice in 10 minutes to try to address all of these, but I'll touch on some of the things that address resource development, which is kind of, the focus of this particular track over here. Rob made it really easy, kind of laying the landscape of where we are right now with things from PubMed Central, where you have small data sets associated with publications, to very large data sets managed on cloud resources. And then we have flanking on either side the domain-specific repositories and the generalist repositories serving a variety of specific use cases over here. And this is kind of the mantra that we kind of share with all of our grantees in terms of the how they should be thinking about data management and sharing per se. But where we want to really get to is kind of this federated landscape where we have a very clean and clear way of programs and studies that are generating a finite number of structured data sets that flow into a reasonable number of repositories and knowledge bases. And what that number is, we don't quite know. And that might be the biggest challenge for us to solve as a community. And tracking the flow of data as well as metadata through these repositories all the way onto platforms that enable another person, a third person who's not generating the data, to discover and mine that data, basically. So what are we specifically doing as a funder? These are some things that I'm kind of touching on. One, focusing on sustaining existing things that are there. That might be winning the lottery, for example. The second would be strengthening the NIH data repository knowledge case, and I'll tell you how. And third is supporting data types that don't quite have a home today. So start backwards. The data sets that don't quite have a home, we have the GRAY initiative that, again, Rob mentioned, and Mark is going to talk in the next session on realizing impact through that. And one of the key things over there is really bringing people together. The other is a funding opportunity announcement for new data resources that we have. So it means something that doesn't quite exist today, and we need a compelling value proposition to kind of make that. Looking at strengthening existing systems, we have established repositories. How do you kind of optimize and sustain those? And looking at implementing consistent data repository attributes, an RDA working group that resulted in kind of building some best practices on right from starting naming it consistently and giving a proper URL that's easily discoverable as a place to start, all the way through to licensing and something more complex as what your preservation policy is. But trying to define that and make it discoverable and have users, both consumers and contributors, fully understand that is really critical. And lastly, sustaining existing repositories, we want to kind of improve research data management practices and machine readability of data. Most of our databases today are made for the human being to be able to consume, not necessarily for the machine. So we want to kind of equitably enable that. And lastly, kind of promoting data reuse over here. And we want to push that because why bother to ask people to share data if no one is using that? And I think Rob had a nice again, metric to show that there is definitely willingness to share as well as reuse if the right things are done. Why do we want to modernize it? We want to reduce and eliminate silos. And I want to use the word optimize, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Optimize costs, of course, for managing, but forget about the cost for now. I'm just talking about data resources optimizing. Really importantly, disentangling resources from research projects, because a lot of our resources start off as research projects, and that's part of the reason why they're not sustainable, because the research project ends to move on. So how do we separate those? And ultimately, of course, for better sharing, discovery, and reuse is why we want to kind of modernize it. And I think Fabio addressed some of these challenges as well. And from our perspective, at the end of the day, we want to implement the data management and sharing policy that went into effect 2 years ago now. Wow, time flies. Of course, doing this effectively requires understanding the data value chain. So you don't want to come at the end of the day and say, okay, now I need to share my data. You've got to incorporate these data management practices right from the beginning of the research life cycle so that it becomes much easier. And I stole this beautiful graphic from our REM kit to depict the research data lifecycle management over there. In terms of program initiatives, I won't go into details right now. I kind of just alluded to it in terms of the data repositories program. Primarily, it's investigator initiated to fill a gap and encourage people to adopt best practices in data management and sharing, get input from the community, really important, and governing this data lifecycle and its preservation so that we can reduce these silos that we have today, enable discovery of our use of the data, particularly NIH funded in our case, and optimize the costs and efficiency of operations. So the real name of the game over here might be optimization, whether it's related to best practices and methods, or even the number of databases that we have. Do we need 3,000 of them, or do we need 100? So really that's a problem that could solve automatically the sustainability issues we have. To date, we have 40 such data resources that we have funded through this program, very carefully looking at the value propositions of each of those that are funded, and most importantly, bringing them together. Again, I think we heard from Christine Orengo yesterday in the BOSS keynote that what enabled the sustainability of the CAT database was really the community that brought together and the collaborative projects. So we want to kind of encourage that, and we want to provide as many forums as possible to leverage economies of scale and reusability of core components of infrastructure, which are most expensive in sustaining some of these data resources. So again, optimization is really, I think, the name of the game over here. And what we want the community to do is develop this shared vision of what this future landscape of data resources should look like. We don't quite have an answer. We have some cloudy idea of it that I kind of just showed in a couple slides before, but we really want the community to come together and crystallize this. The other program initiative is the generalist repository program that Mark will talk about a little bit, but the real focus over here is how do we bring some level of competitors together to be able to address some common capabilities that they all need to address. So it's really building some cohesive, consistent capabilities, which also lowers the barrier for contributors and incentivizes them for data sharing. And in this process, really encouraging and educating people on fair practices and enabling them to adopt. So Mark will talk more about this, but again, the concept of co-opetition and how can competitors work together and benefit from that. That's also a sustainability aspect. I think somebody mentioned about software initiatives. I think the Magnify talk is really about best practices in software development. So we have a dedicated program so that every grant that we fund is not reinventing the same software doing steps A to G, and everybody not addressing the more difficult, challenging steps downstream from H to Z. So it's really kind of funding reusable software across the programs, and also funding the research software engineers who are bringing in some of those best practices, and how do we make them independently drive some of these projects on their own. Lastly, in terms of stewardship, there's a tremendous wealth of experience and expertise in the community, and there are established communities that are developing this, including the Elixir community, the Go Fair. Many of these are global and international. Maybe the data curation network is local to the United States, but it's essentially bringing together librarians to kind of develop these best practices in data curation and encouraging researchers to adopt those practices. Couple other points that we're doing is really kind of incentivizing people through challenges. Again, incentivizing them to share and reuse data. We have 2 such challenges. And the latest one that's on right now is the Data Sharing Index, which is actively promoting data sharing and developing a robust metric to reward exemplary data sharers. So again, really building incentives over here, even if it's too late to join and participate and submit, I would encourage you to watch what's happening and kind of contribute to it as observers from this outside. Want to build services, and I think one of the key things that we've built is really helping people mint persistent identifiers, established an NIH consortium because it's not quite easy for anybody to go and just get a DOI for their data set, and we want to do this in a structured way so that repositories, NIH-funded repositories, are encouraged to mint DOIs and or some kind of persistent identifiers. And so researchers are then incentivized to deposit in a repository and then automatically get their persistent identifier so that we can make data citations the name of the game again over here and make it kind of a standard. We hope that in this process, we'll be able to realize some of the FAIR data priorities and very simply making data sharing easier, improving discoverability of NIH-funded data sets, secondary use of data, and ultimately increase reproducibility of research and the general public trust in NIH-funded, federally funded research programs. Wanted to leave you with a parting thought about data architecture, might needing new toolkits, but it's not just the new shiny things that are needed. Please don't forget the indigenous and existing tools and methodologies that are there and kind of leverage them in combination. This, if you don't know what root bridges are, I'd encourage you to go and look at it. These are some of the bridges that become stronger with age and don't quite need to be repaired in the way we wanted. We need to repair new bridges over here. So on that note, I'll let you all go get your coffee. I think I'm 2 minutes over time. And do please come back for the next session on measuring impact from some of the resources as an example.
That's great, thank you. Thank you very much, Ishwar. I know there are questions in the audience, but if people want to go free for their coffee.
That's right, I'm here so I can answer questions.
Roland Fleming, University College. So I don't have NIH funding for infrastructure, right? But I'm going to ask you a provocative question in that regard, right? So I've been told very concerning stories from PIs in Europe about, overnight cutoff of their NIH funding. And so, firstly, this is very damaging for American leadership in the world. And secondly, what are you doing about it to try and fix this situation?
So, this is not a question I can exactly answer because this is not science driven. These are policy driven. So it's a little challenge to answer. And again, we're talking over here in terms of resources. And I think this is kind of an interim phase. And we'll kind of get through this to be able to kind of effectively address it because policies change, people come and go. It's really a question of making sure we are complying with the rules and the general governance. So I think the international collaboration is not going to go away scientifically. So it's really a question of how to kind of enable that. I think given some of the new policies that have been put into place, some things have had to be paused. And that actually applies across the board. It's not just internationally, even within the United States. So we're kind of reassessing and then we'll cross each step as we get through them. So, I mean, I can take this offline and kind of give you some anecdotes, but that's kind of the broad general response there.
Thank you very much, Ishwar. Thank you, everyone, and we'll